We've had an incredible 12 months where apparently very secure regimes have fallen in the face of popular protest. So we've seen, if you like, dictatorships overthrown by popular protest, and I think few of us could have predicted that 12 months ago. So it's completely shaken our conventional thinking about the Arab world. And a feature of these uprisings has been the role of the social media technology, which has enabled people to organise in a way which has bypassed the otherwise authoritarian political controls of the governments of, say, Tunisia, Egypt and Libya. And that is an interesting feature. It's becoming increasingly difficult for authoritarian regime to exert the sort of control they need in order to keep themselves secure against this protest.
So communities are learning that they're in a global culture and aren't as easily isolated as some of their dictatorships might have thought.
Yes, and the other thing is that people now have the ability to relay images via mobile telephones and the like, not only to towns about 10 miles down the road, but also across borders, which means, for example, the Egyptian population was watching very closely the unfolding drama which occurred in Tunisia, which began about a year ago. And you couldn't imagine the Egyptian revolution occurring without the Tunisian upheaval. And conversely, you can't imagine the Libyan upheaval without the Egyptian revolution, Egypt being so central in the Arab world. So it is a remarkable development, and we've now seen in Syria a situation where a regime is fighting to resist and using incredible force against unarmed protesters. More than 5,000 people, according to the UN, have been killed.
That's right. What are your expectations there?
Well, I personally feel that the regime is engaged in a grim end game. It shows no willingness to go, but nor did the Gaddafi regime. But I can't help feeling that the Assad regime has increasingly finding itself domestically discredited and internationally isolated. Even its friends, such as Russia and China, have now apparently delivered warnings to the Assad regime that the regime can't rely on violence to get itself out of this very tight spot that it's in.
So, well, that's exactly right. A tight spot is a good way to phrase it, actually. How do you, in a situation where we're seeing a sort of a rolling revolution across many countries, how does that come to an end? How do they calm? Because it's not just by the stepping down of a dictator, is it?
No, in fact, that's a really good question, because removing a dictator does not fix the problems which motivated that step. That is to say, many people have removed a dictator for political and economic reasons, mainly economic. And clearly that step, removing the dictator, doesn't fix the problem. But what it does do is open up the possibility for ushering in a new political system which may make the majority of the citizens of the countries concerned their life a lot better. But I think removing a dictator increases expectations dramatically, and the danger, of course, is that the realities on the ground after the overthrow of the dictator cannot live up to the expectations of people who have participated in that event. So we're in a tricky situation at the moment, and you could say the present situation in many of the Arab countries which have experienced revolution is that there is signs of both alarm and hope, and there is certainly turbulence in Egypt and there's turbulence in Libya. Speaking
of Libya, they're enjoying, we hear in our story this evening, the reporter saying that Libya is enjoying a revolutionary honeymoon. When that reporter describes it in that way, what do you think that presupposes? That there will be further violence?
Well, there's definitely ethnic tensions and differences. Obviously, when Gaddafi was there, he was a unifying force for the opposition, and with his departure, some of the ethnic differences and tribal differences in that country may come to the fore. But, you know, it's got several things going for it which may help the country cohere. It's got considerable wealth in terms of oil resources. It's also got quite an educated elite, some of whom have returned to Libya with the fall of the Gaddafi regime. So I don't think we should be necessarily pessimistic there, but clearly there are problems. The other thing to note here is that in the case of Libya, NATO played a key role in bringing about the end of the Gaddafi regime. And that's quite unlike Egypt or the case of Tunisia, the international community in the shape of NATO did play a key role in bringing about the end of the Gaddafi regime.
But it's always a difficult thing, isn't it, when the international community is called upon or feels obliged to step in. How is that line best walked?
Well, I think NATO was very sensible once the military operation was over to begin to say it was up to the Libyan people now that Colonel Gaddafi's regime had collapsed and gone. I think it was sensible for NATO to say that only the Libyans could decide their political future. But there is an expectation, and indeed it would be naive to think otherwise. The NATO did extract some sort of pledge from the rebels, the Libyan rebels, as they were when they were in opposition to Colonel Gaddafi, to have an 8-month period running up to elections, and they'll be looking hard. The NATO countries, including the United States, will be looking hard for the Libyan rebels to make good on their promises to hold full parliamentary elections within that 8-month time frame.
Is 1 year a short time for a revolution or for revolutions as we've seen?
Oh, I think it's a very short time. But I think on balance, I would be guardedly optimistic about what's happened, because I think there was a great deal of disillusionment outside the Arab world with the fact that the process of democratisation seemed to have bypassed the area altogether. We now know, 12 months on, that's not the case. And however, this development, while I think promising for the people who live in the region, nevertheless creates complications for the Western world, not least the United States. The United States had got used to working with a number of authoritarian regimes such as Mubarak and also the Tunisian regime to a lesser extent. It now has to effectively redraw its foreign policy in the Middle East, and it's doing that. And that could complicate its support for Israel, because after all, Israel had always stressed that it was the only democracy in the Middle East region. It can no longer make that claim. And of course, that claim was very closely associated with its strategic partnership with the United States. So it could, in the long run, the process we've seen, lead to America redefining its relationship with Israel, as well as extending closer relations to a number of more representative, newly emerging Arab governments.